How to Avoid Generational Poverty and Build Wealth Transfer. Written, narrated, and produced by Audiobook Mantra. This audiobook is not about get rich quick, it is about ending a cycle. It explores how poverty is passed down, how wealth is preserved, and how intentional structure can change the trajectory of an entire family line. Listen carefully, think generationally, act deliberately. Introduction. When struggle is inherited, most people believe poverty is accidental. It is not. Poverty is patterned. It repeats not because people are lazy, but because behaviors, beliefs, fears, and financial chaos are quietly transferred from one generation to the next, often without a single conversation. Children do not inherit money first. They inherit behavior. They inherit how adults react to bills, how stress is handled, how spending is justified, how saving is avoided, how debt is normalized, how instability is explained away. Long before a child understands money, they understand how money feels: anxiety, urgency, shame, fear, silence. These emotional patterns become default settings. This is how generational poverty survives even when income changes. A family earns more but behaves the same. The numbers shift, the patterns do not. And patterns always win. Wealth transfer is not about inheritance. It is about continuity. Continuity of discipline, continuity of structure, continuity of emotional regulation, continuity of standards. This is why some families remain stable for generations, while others rise briefly and collapse. The difference is not opportunity, it is intentional design. Most people try to escape poverty individually. Very few try to end it structurally. This audiobook is about the difference. It is about how to become the generation that stops improvising, stops reacting, and starts building systems that outlive individual effort. You do not need to be wealthy to do this. You need to be deliberate. Because the most powerful inheritance is not money, it is order. This audiobook will show you how generational poverty forms, why good intentions fail without structure, and how even modest income can be transformed into lasting stability when systems replace chaos. This is not about perfection, it is about permanence. If you are ready to think beyond yourself, beyond this year, beyond your lifetime, continue listening. Chapter 1. The Inheritance You Didn't Choose. How Financial Chaos is Passed Down. Long before you ever earned your first dollar, a financial identity was already forming inside you. Not through lessons, not through instruction, but through atmosphere. Money is one of the earliest emotional languages a child learns. It is learned indirectly, absorbed through tone, tension, silence, and reaction. Children do not need to understand numbers to understand instability. They feel it in the room. They feel it in voices that tighten when bills arrive. They feel it in arguments that start small and end unresolved. They feel it in the way adults avoid conversations, postpone decisions, or suddenly panic. This is the inheritance most people never recognize. Not money itself, but how money behaves in a household. Chaos is learned. A child who grows up around financial chaos learns that money is unpredictable, urgent, and emotionally charged. They learn that calm does not exist around finances. They learn that decisions are reactive, not deliberate. They learn that survival matters more than planning, that today must be solved before tomorrow can even be considered. These lessons sink deep because they are learned before logic develops. By the time adulthood arrives, these patterns feel normal, familiar, safe, even. This is why generational poverty is not simply the absence of money. It is the presence of disorder that reproduces itself. Families do not pass down balances. They pass down behaviors. How often money is discussed, whether it is planned or avoided, whether mistakes are corrected or hidden, whether stability is built or improvised. Most families never stop to design these behaviors intentionally. They inherit them, adapt them slightly, and pass them forward again. This is how cycles survive. A parent may work harder than their own parents. They may earn more. They may provide better opportunities. But if the underlying relationship with money remains emotional, reactive, and unstructured, the next generation inherits a more comfortable version of the same instability. The chaos becomes quieter, less dramatic, but no less destructive. Children raised in such environments often grow up believing that financial stress is normal, that calm is temporary, and that security is fragile. They may become high achievers, hard workers, and intelligent adults, and still recreate instability unconsciously, because chaos, when familiar, feels safer than calm. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths in generational psychology. People do not repeat patterns because they want to suffer. They repeat patterns because the nervous system prefers the known. If instability was the background of childhood, stability can feel suspicious. When life becomes calm, the body waits for something to go wrong. When finances improve, anxiety increases instead of decreasing. This anxiety often leads to decisions that restore familiar stress. This is not failure, it is conditioning. Generational poverty survives through conditioning, not lack of effort. This is why telling people to do better with money rarely works. Behavior is not chosen freely when identity has been shaped by years of emotional learning. To end a cycle, one generation must do something radically different. They must slow down where others rush. They must plan where others react. They must bring structure where others improvise. They must tolerate discomfort long enough for new patterns to form. This generation becomes the interruption. Not louder, not wealthier, more intentional. Ending generational poverty does not begin with money. It begins with order. Order in how money is discussed. Order in how decisions are made. Order in how mistakes are handled. Order in how stability is prioritized. When order enters a family system, children feel it immediately. They feel predictability. They feel consistency. They feel calm. Even if income is modest, order creates safety. Safety changes behavior. A child raised in financial order learns patience. They learn that decisions are made deliberately. They learn that money is planned, not panicked over. They learn that the future exists and is considered. This child grows into an adult who does not need chaos to feel alive. That is how cycles end, not through sudden wealth, but through sustained structure. This chapter matters because it removes blame. If you grew up in financial instability, you did not choose it. If you internalized chaotic money behaviors, you did not invent them. But if you continue them, that becomes a choice. You are not responsible for the inheritance you received. You are responsible for whether you pass it on. This audiobook exists for those who feel that responsibility deeply. Those who understand that wealth transfer is not about leaving money behind, but about leaving systems behind. Because money can disappear, order endures. And the generation that introduces order becomes the foundation upon which everything else is built. When you change the environment, behavior follows. When behavior changes, identity stabilizes. When identity stabilizes, the cycle breaks. This is how generational poverty ends. Not loudly, not quickly, but permanently. Chapter 2. The myth of earning more. Why income alone never breaks the cycle. One of the most dangerous beliefs passed down in families is simple and seductive. If we just earned more, everything would be fine. This belief feels logical. It feels hopeful. It feels actionable. And it quietly keeps cycles alive. Income is visible. Order is not. So families focus on the visible. They push harder. They work longer. They chase raises, promotions, side hustles, opportunities. They tell the next generation that success is about earning more than the last. But without structure, income is only fuel. And fuel poured into chaos creates fire, not progress. This is why generational poverty survives. Income increases. A household can double its earnings and still feel unstable. A family can climb socially and still collapse financially. A child can be raised with more comforts and still inherit the same anxiety around money. Because income does not correct behavior, it amplifies it. If money is handled reactively, more money increases reaction. If money is spent emotionally, more money increases emotional spending. If money is avoided, more money increases avoidance. Income makes patterns louder. This is why the earning more strategy fails so often. It assumes money is the missing ingredient, when the real absence is design. Design answers questions income never touches. Who decides how money is used? What happens when something unexpected occurs? How are trade-offs evaluated? What is protected first? What is never touched? Without answers, income flows without direction. Families caught in generational poverty often become trapped in a cycle of heroic effort. One person becomes the provider, the fixer, the rescuer. They carry the system on their back instead of building a system that can carry everyone. This looks admirable. It feels responsible. It is unsustainable. When income is the only strategy, pressure concentrates on individuals instead of structures. When that individual burns out, the system collapses again. The next generation watches this happen. They learn that money equals stress. They learn that success requires sacrifice without stability. They learn that working harder does not create peace. So they either repeat the pattern or reject money entirely. Both outcomes preserve the cycle. The wealthy understand something fundamental. Income is an event. Systems are continuity. Events come and go. Continuity endures. This is why wealthy families focus less on how much is earned and more on how money behaves once it arrives. They teach structure early, not through lectures, but through consistency. Bills are handled calmly. Decisions are explained without emotion. Trade-offs are discussed openly. Limits are clear and predictable. Children raised in such environments learn that money is not magical. It is procedural. Procedural money creates calm. Calm allows long-term thinking. This is the invisible inheritance that breaks cycles. The myth of earning more also creates delay. People postpone discipline until income improves. They tell themselves that systems will come later when there is enough. Enough never arrives, because without systems, no amount ever feels sufficient. The disciplined reverse the order. They build structure when income is modest. They practice restraint when it is uncomfortable. They establish rules before abundance arrives. This way, when income increases, nothing breaks. The cycle ends not when money appears, but when behavior stabilizes. If you want to end generational poverty, you must abandon the fantasy that income alone will save you or those who come after you. Income can help, but only structure transforms. This chapter is here to remove a dangerous illusion. You do not need to earn your way out of the cycle first. You need to design your way out. Design turns money from a temporary relief into a permanent tool. And once design exists, income finally does what people always hoped it would do. It builds something that lasts. Chapter 3. The silence around money. How what is never said becomes the strongest lesson. In many families, money is not discussed, not because it is unimportant, but because it is emotionally charged. Silence becomes the default response to discomfort. Children notice this long before they understand why. They sense tension when bills arrive. They feel the shift in mood when money is mentioned. They observe how conversations stop abruptly or change direction. No one explains. No one clarifies. No one teaches. And in the absence of explanation, the mind fills the gap with fear. Silence teaches more powerfully than words. It teaches that money is dangerous, that questions are unwelcome, that mistakes are shameful, that uncertainty must be hidden. This silent curriculum shapes identity. A child raised in money silence grows into an adult who avoids money conversations. They hesitate to ask. They delay decisions. They fear exposure. Avoidance becomes inherited. Families do not need to explicitly teach fear. They only need to avoid clarity. This is how silence preserves generational poverty, even when intentions are good. Parents often believe they are protecting children by staying silent. They think they are shielding them from stress, worry, or responsibility. But what they are actually passing down is confusion. Confusion is more destabilizing than truth. When children are not taught how money works, they are forced to learn through consequences. Consequences are a harsh teacher. The wealthy do the opposite. They normalize conversation. Money is discussed without panic. Questions are answered calmly. Mistakes are explained, not hidden. Trade-offs are made visible. This does not burden children. It stabilizes them. When money is normalized, fear dissolves. Children learn that money is not a threat. It is a system. Systems can be learned. Silence, on the other hand, trains emotional reactivity. When adults raised in silence encounter money pressure, they feel overwhelmed quickly. They never learned how to process financial information without emotion, so emotion becomes the default response. This is why silence is one of the most powerful transmitters of poverty. It transfers uncertainty. It transfers anxiety. It transfers avoidance. Breaking this inheritance requires courage. Someone must choose to speak calmly where silence once lived. Someone must explain where confusion ruled. Someone must allow discomfort without retreat. This does not require perfection. It requires presence. Talking about money does not mean burdening children with adult problems. It means modeling calm decision-making. It means showing how priorities are set, how trade-offs are weighed, how mistakes are corrected. These behaviors teach more than any lecture ever could. The generation that breaks silence introduces stability. Stability teaches confidence. Confidence changes behavior. This chapter matters because silence feels harmless, even kind, but it quietly shapes fear. Fear shapes behavior. Behavior shapes outcome. If you want to end a cycle, you must end the silence, not with panic, not with drama, with clarity. And clarity, once introduced, becomes a new inheritance. Chapter 4. When instability becomes identity. How chaos is normalized inside families. Instability does not always feel like danger. Sometimes it feels like home. When chaos is present for long enough, it stops registering as a problem and starts functioning as a baseline. The nervous system adapts. What once felt alarming becomes familiar. What once felt temporary becomes expected. This is how instability turns into identity. Families living with long-term financial uncertainty often develop an unspoken understanding of how life works. Nothing is said directly, but everything is learned indirectly. Plans are tentative, promises are cautious, decisions are made quickly and reversed often. The future exists, but only abstractly. Children raised in this environment learn something subtle and powerful. Nothing is permanent. Money comes and goes. Security appears and disappears. Stability is fragile. So the mind stops investing deeply in long-term outcomes. Why plan carefully if things can collapse overnight? Why delay gratification if tomorrow is unpredictable? Why trust structure if it has failed before? These questions are not asked consciously. They are answered emotionally. This is why instability is not just a condition, it becomes a worldview. People raised in chaos often grow up highly adaptable. They are quick thinkers. They improvise well. They handle pressure. They survive. These are strengths. But when survival becomes identity, it limits growth. Survivors are excellent at reacting. They are rarely trained to maintain. Maintenance requires trust. Trust requires predictability. Predictability was never present, so chaos becomes familiar, and familiarity feels safe. This is the quiet reason many people sabotage stability when it begins to form. Calm feels foreign. Order feels suspicious. Routine feels empty. The body waits for something to go wrong, and when nothing does, the mind introduces disruption, a sudden expense, an impulsive decision, a breakdown in communication, a rejection of structure, not because the person wants chaos, but because chaos feels known. This is how generational poverty survives, even when conditions improve. Income rises, opportunities increase, but identity lags behind. The internal narrative remains unchanged. This won't last. Something will happen. I should enjoy it while I can. These thoughts feel realistic. They are actually conditioned fear. The wealthy experience stress too, but they do not normalize instability. They treat chaos as a temporary deviation, not a permanent state. This distinction is critical. When instability is treated as normal, it is tolerated. When it is treated as unacceptable, it is corrected. Families that break cycles do not eliminate hardship. They refuse to romanticize it. They do not glorify struggle. They do not build identity around survival. They do not teach children that stress is inevitable. They teach that order can exist even when resources are limited. This is a radical shift. Order does not require wealth. It requires intention. Order is how decisions are made, how routines are protected, how money is discussed, how mistakes are handled. When order enters a family system, instability loses its authority. Children raised in ordered environments learn that life is navigable, that problems are addressed deliberately, that setbacks do not erase structure. This produces a different nervous system, a calmer one, a more patient one, one capable of long-term thinking. Breaking the identity of instability does not happen quickly. It requires consistency that feels unnatural at first. It requires maintaining routines, even when chaos tempts interruption. It requires choosing predictability when drama feels more familiar. The generation that does this often feels lonely at first. They feel different from those around them. They feel rigid where others are flexible. They feel cautious where others are spontaneous. But this difference is the signal of transformation. Identity is shifting. When stability becomes familiar, behavior changes naturally. Impulse weakens. Planning strengthens. Anxiety reduces. Money begins to behave predictably. This chapter exists to name something that is rarely named. If instability has always been present in your life, calm may feel uncomfortable. That does not mean calm is wrong. It means your nervous system is learning something new. The goal is not to eliminate all uncertainty. It is to stop letting uncertainty define who you are. Once instability is no longer identity, it becomes manageable. And when it becomes manageable, the cycle begins to loosen, not through force, not through income, through order becoming normal. That is how generational poverty begins to lose its grip. Chapter 5. Good intentions are not enough. Why willpower fails and systems endure. Most families trapped in generational poverty are not careless. They are well-intentioned. They want stability. They want better lives for their children. They want the struggle to end. And yet, despite effort, promises, and sacrifice, the cycle continues. This is because intention without structure collapses under pressure. Willpower feels powerful in calm moments. It feels convincing during reflection. It feels real when circumstances are manageable. But willpower is not designed to survive stress. Stress strips behavior down to defaults, and defaults are inherited. Families often rely on hope-based discipline. They promise to do better next month. They vow to save when things improve. They plan to fix finances after the next paycheck, the next opportunity, the next relief. Hope becomes the system. Hope is fragile. When pressure arrives, and it always does, hope dissolves. Decisions revert to survival logic. Short-term relief overrides long-term design. The intention remains, but behavior changes. This is not hypocrisy. It is predictability. Human beings do not operate on intention during stress. They operate on systems or instincts. If no system exists, instinct wins. Instinct prioritizes relief. Systems protect stability. The wealthy understand this deeply. They do not trust good intentions to carry families forward. They build frameworks that operate when intention disappears. Frameworks are boring. They are repetitive. They are unglamorous. And they work. This is the difference between families that rise briefly and families that stabilize permanently. The first rely on heroic effort. The second rely on design. Heroic effort is exhausting. Design is sustainable. Many people believe systems remove humanity, warmth, or flexibility. They imagine rigid rules, constant monitoring, or emotional coldness. This belief keeps chaos alive. Real systems do not eliminate flexibility. They contain it. A system defines what is protected first. A system decides in advance what happens under pressure. A system removes emotion from repeat decisions. When families lack systems, every decision becomes a negotiation. Should we spend this now? Can we afford that? Is this an emergency or just uncomfortable? These questions feel reasonable until they are asked every week, under stress, with fatigue present. Decision fatigue erodes discipline. This is why families break promises to themselves, not because they are weak, but because they are exhausted. Systems eliminate exhaustion. They answer questions before they arise. They create predictability. Predictability calms the nervous system. Calm allows patience. Patience enables planning. Planning builds stability. This chain reaction cannot occur without structure. Generational poverty survives in families that rely on character instead of design. They believe if people cared more, tried harder, or sacrificed longer, things would improve. But care without containment leads to burnout. Sacrifice without systems leads to resentment. Eventually, someone breaks, and when they do, the cycle resets. The families that end the cycle stop asking individuals to be stronger. They make strength unnecessary. They design systems that function even when motivation is gone. This is not about control. It is about relief. Relief from constant decision-making. Relief from emotional negotiation. Relief from chaos disguised as flexibility. Children raised in systems feel this relief intuitively. They grow up in environments where money behaves consistently, where boundaries exist, where decisions feel predictable. They internalize a powerful lesson. Life is manageable. This lesson changes everything. A person who believes life is manageable does not panic under pressure. They do not rush decisions. They do not grasp for relief. They wait. Waiting is the seed of wealth. This chapter exists to dismantle a dangerous illusion that wanting stability is enough. It is not. Stability must be engineered, and the generation that engineers it does something extraordinary. They remove pressure from individuals. They remove guilt from mistakes. They remove fear from money. They replace all of it with structure. Structure does not make life rigid. It makes life survivable and then expandable. That is how cycles end, not with better intentions, but with systems that endure when intention fades. Chapter 6. The Silent Transfer. How children absorb money behavior without a single word. Children are not taught how to think about money. They are trained, not through instruction but through exposure. Every household operates as a classroom, even when no one intends to teach. The lessons are delivered through tone, timing, reaction, and routine. Children watch how adults respond to stress, how decisions are made under pressure, and how quickly panic replaces calm. This observation happens continuously and unconsciously. By the time a child understands numbers, they already understand money's emotional role. They know whether money is feared or respected. They know whether money is discussed or avoided. They know whether mistakes lead to correction or blame. They know whether stability is expected or treated as temporary. These impressions become internal templates. Templates guide behavior automatically. This is why telling children to serve or be responsible rarely works if the environment contradicts the message. Children do not imitate words. They imitate patterns. If they see adults avoiding bills, they learn avoidance. If they see panic under pressure, they learn panic. If they see impulsive relief spending, they learn to soothe with money. The lesson is not intentional, but it is precise. This is the silent transfer. It is powerful because it bypasses conscious reasoning. There is no debate, no resistance, no questioning. The behavior is simply absorbed as how things are done. This is why generational poverty can persist even in families that deeply value improvement. The values are spoken, but the behaviors remain unchanged. Children trust behavior over language. The wealthy understand this instinctively. They focus less on what they say about money and more on how money behaves around their children. Calm is visible. Structure is consistent. Decisions are predictable. Children raised in such environments learn that money is navigable. They see planning in action. They witness delayed gratification without drama. They observe boundaries without guilt. These experiences teach more than any lecture ever could. This is also why attempting to fix children's money habits later often fails. By the time habits are visible, the templates are already installed. The work must happen upstream. Parents and caregivers often underestimate this responsibility. They believe children are unaware or unaffected. But children are exquisitely sensitive to emotional signals, especially around survival-related topics like money. They feel tension even when nothing is said. They notice shifts in energy. They remember reactions more than events. When financial stress dominates a household, children adapt by becoming hyper-aware or emotionally detached. Both adaptations shape future behavior. Hyper-aware children often grow into anxious adults who obsess over money. Detached children often grow into avoidant adults who disengage from financial reality. Both outcomes preserve instability. Breaking this silent transfer requires a conscious shift. It does not require perfection. It requires consistency. Consistency in response. Consistency in structure. Consistency in tone. When adults handle money calmly, even under stress, children learn that pressure is survivable. When adults correct mistakes without panic, children learn that errors are not catastrophic. These lessons form emotional resilience. Resilience is the real inheritance. Resilient individuals do not panic spend. They do not avoid decisions. They do not require chaos to feel alive. They can wait. Waiting changes trajectories. Many people believe they must teach children complex financial knowledge to prepare them for life. This is a misunderstanding. Knowledge can be learned later. Emotional regulation cannot. If children learn calm, structure, and patience early, money skills follow naturally. If they learn fear, chaos, and avoidance early, No amount of information will correct behavior under stress. This is why modeling matters more than instruction. You do not need to explain everything. You need to behave intentionally. The generation that ends the cycle understands this truth deeply. They realize that every financial decision is also a lesson. Every reaction is a message. Every pattern is a blueprint. They take this responsibility seriously, not with pressure, but with presence. This chapter exists to reframe what wealth transfer really is. It is not money passed down at death. It is behavior passed down daily. When behavior changes, inheritance changes. And when inheritance changes, the cycle breaks quietly, steadily, and permanently. Chapter 7: Misplaced Sacrifice. How selflessness can secretly preserve the cycle. Sacrifice is often praised as virtue. Parents work longer hours. They give up personal comfort. They absorb stress silently. They do whatever it takes. From the outside, this looks noble. From the inside, it often feels necessary. But sacrifice without structure carries a hidden cost. When sacrifice becomes the primary financial strategy in a family, it teaches a dangerous lesson. Stability comes from suffering, not design. Children raised in sacrificial environments learn that money is earned through exhaustion, that survival requires constant giving, that personal needs are secondary, sometimes irrelevant. This lesson is not spoken, it is lived. The child watches adults stretch themselves thin to hold everything together. They feel the emotional weight even if they do not understand the numbers. They internalize the idea that responsibility means depletion. Later, as adults, they repeat the pattern. They overextend. They rescue financially. They neglect boundaries. They confuse love with self-erasure. This is how cycles persist. Misplaced sacrifice creates fragile systems. When one person carries the burden, the system depends on their endurance. When endurance fails, through illness, burnout, or misfortune, everything collapses. True stability does not rely on heroes. It relies on systems. The wealthy do not teach children that success requires suffering. They teach that success requires foresight. They demonstrate boundaries without guilt. They show that saying no protects everyone. They model sustainability over martyrdom. This creates a different internal compass. A child raised in such an environment learns that care does not require collapse, that generosity can exist alongside self-protection, that love does not demand depletion. This lesson is transformative. Misplaced sacrifice also creates silence. Parents often hide financial stress to protect children. They sacrifice privately, carrying anxiety alone. Children sense this tension and often internalize responsibility for it. They feel they must not ask for much. They feel guilty for needs. They feel pressure to perform. This guilt shapes future money behavior. People raised this way often struggle to invest in themselves. They undercharge, they underspend on growth. They feel uncomfortable with ease. They associate comfort with selfishness. The wealthy understand that sustainability is the highest form of care. They do not glorify struggle. They do not hide reality. They do not turn sacrifice into identity. They distribute responsibility through systems. Systems allow generosity without collapse. When a family has clear boundaries, expectations, and plans, no one person must bleed to keep it alive. Stress is shared, decisions are predictable, sacrifice is strategic, not constant. This creates a calmer environment. Calm teaches confidence. Confidence breaks cycles. Breaking the habit of misplaced sacrifice requires a redefinition of responsibility. Responsibility is not absorbing all risk. It is designing out unnecessary risk. Responsibility is not giving endlessly, it is building structures that reduce the need for rescue. Responsibility is not shielding others from reality. It is preparing them to navigate it. This shift feels uncomfortable at first. Those who stop sacrificing excessively may feel guilt. They may feel like they are doing less, even as they are doing something far more effective. But over time, the results speak quietly. Stability improves, stress reduces, boundaries strengthen, children feel safer. The cycle begins to loosen. This chapter exists to challenge a belief that keeps many families stuck. You do not end generational poverty by suffering harder than those before you. You end it by refusing to make suffering the system. The generation that breaks the cycle is not the one that sacrifices the most. It is the one that designs the most carefully, and careful design lasts far longer than heroic effort ever could. Chapter 8: Too Late to Teach. Why timing matters more than information. Most families wait too long to talk about money, not because they don't care, but because they believe understanding comes with age. They tell themselves children are too young, too innocent, too unprepared, so they delay. They plan to explain money later, when things are stable, when the child is old enough, when the conversation will be easier. But by the time that moment arrives, the most important lessons have already been learned, silently, emotionally, and permanently. Money behavior is formed before money knowledge. This is the mistake that keeps cycles alive. By adolescence, most people already carry deep emotional associations with money, fear, urgency, avoidance, shame, comparison. These emotions operate faster than logic and overpower it under stress. When families introduce financial education late, they are trying to overwrite instinct with information. Information loses. This is why many intelligent, educated adults still struggle financially. They know what to do, but they feel something else. Feelings decide behavior long before reasoning gets a vote. The wealthy understand timing. They do not wait to teach concepts. They shape environments early. They let children observe planning. They let them see trade-offs discussed calmly. They let them witness restraint without drama. They allow questions without shame. These experiences happen years before a child ever handles money independently. By the time knowledge is introduced, the emotional foundation is already stable. This foundation changes everything. A child who grows up seeing money handled calmly does not panic when faced with responsibility. They do not rush decisions. They do not equate spending with relief. They feel grounded. A child who grows up in silence or chaos, however, reaches adulthood with emotional reflexes that information cannot easily undo. This is why financial advice often fails. Advice assumes a neutral emotional baseline. Most people do not have one. Timing also affects authority. When money is discussed early and naturally, it becomes part of life. When it is introduced suddenly and seriously later, it feels heavy, threatening, and overwhelming. Late lessons feel like judgment. Early exposure feels like normalcy. This distinction matters deeply. Children are not overwhelmed by complexity. They are overwhelmed by emotional intensity. Calm explanations build competence. Delayed urgency builds fear. Families that break cycles introduce money gradually, without ceremony. They do not wait for perfect moments. They integrate money into everyday life. They allow children to see mistakes corrected calmly. They allow them to experience small consequences safely. They normalize learning through experience. This creates financial confidence. Confidence is not arrogance. It is comfort with decision-making. Comfort leads to patience. Patience enables planning. Planning builds stability. This chain cannot form if learning begins too late. Breaking generational poverty requires understanding that timing is part of structure. You do not hand responsibility to someone suddenly and expect calm. You prepare them long before responsibility arrives. This preparation is subtle. It is not lectures, it is exposure. Exposure to order, exposure to consistency, exposure to calm. The generation that ends the cycle does not wait until the next generation is struggling to intervene. They begin before struggle has a chance to form. This chapter exists to remove another illusion, that knowledge alone can correct inherited patterns. It cannot. Knowledge must land on stable emotional ground to take root. That ground is built early, and when it is built, the cycle does not just weaken, it dissolves. Chapter 9: Values without systems. Why good principles disappear in one generation. Most families believe they are passing down values. They talk about hard work, they emphasize honesty, they praise responsibility, they warn against waste. And yet, one generation later, those values seem to vanish. This disappearance is not accidental. Values do not survive on intention alone. They survive through systems. When values are not embedded into daily structure, they become abstract ideas, admired, repeated, and ignored under pressure. This is why families often say, "We taught them better," while watching the same patterns repeat. Teaching is not transmission. Structure is. Values exist in language. Systems exist in behavior. Behavior always wins. A family may value saving, but if there is no system that automatically protects savings, spending will eventually override intention. A family may value discipline, but if decisions are always made emotionally in the moment, discipline dissolves. This gap between values and execution is where generational poverty hides. People grow up believing in the right ideas, but living without the right mechanisms. The wealthy understand that values must be operationalized. Responsibility is not a speech, it is a routine. Discipline is not a belief, it is a process. Stability is not a hope, it is a structure. When values are built into systems, they survive individual weakness. When they are not, they rely on constant effort, and effort fails under stress. This is why families that break cycles focus obsessively on how values are expressed. If they value saving, saving happens automatically. If they value restraint, limits are predefined. If they value planning, planning is scheduled. Children raised in these environments do not need to be convinced of values. They live inside them. Living inside a value is different from agreeing with it. Agreement disappears under pressure. Environment does not. This is why wealth transfer fails even in families with strong moral codes. Morality without mechanism is fragile. Values without systems ask individuals to perform perfectly forever. That is unrealistic. Systems allow imperfection without collapse. They catch mistakes early, they correct quietly. They reduce reliance on willpower. Families trapped in generational poverty often rely on character instead of design. They believe if people cared enough, things would work out. They appeal to responsibility, guilt, and sacrifice, all of which exhaust rather than stabilize. The wealthy do not moralize money behavior, they engineer it. This engineering is not cold, it is compassionate. Compassion recognizes human limits. It assumes people will get tired, emotional, distracted, and overwhelmed, and designs around that reality. This is why wealthy families feel calm across generations. They are not better people, they are better designers. Design removes pressure from individuals. When pressure is removed, behavior improves naturally. Children raised in systems do not experience money as a test of character. They experience it as a set of procedures that make life predictable. Predictability builds trust. Trust allows patience. Patience enables long-term thinking. Long-term thinking is the foundation of wealth transfer. This chapter matters because many people believe values are enough. They are not. Values must be translated. Translated into rules, translated into routines, translated into boundaries. When that translation does not happen, values remain decorative. They look good, they sound right, they fail under pressure. The generation that ends generational poverty does not just talk about values. They lock them into systems. They make the right behavior the default behavior. And defaults shape destiny. When values become structure, they stop depending on memory, motivation, or morality they endure. That endurance is how cycles finally break, not through better intentions, but through better design. Chapter 10. Thinking Too Short. Why wealth transfer fails when families plan for one lifetime. Most families plan their finances as if life ends with them. They think in terms of survival, comfort, and retirement, all important. But rarely in terms of continuity. The horizon stops at personal safety. Everything beyond that feels abstract, optional, or unrealistic. This is not selfishness, it is conditioning. When resources have always felt scarce, thinking beyond one lifetime feels indulgent. The mind focuses on making it through the present, not shaping the future. Legacy thinking feels like something reserved for the wealthy, not something built gradually. But this belief is one of the quiet engines of generational poverty. Wealth transfer fails not because families lack money, but because they lack time perspective. Short-term planning creates short-lived stability. A person works hard, improves their situation, and stabilizes their life. But without a framework that extends beyond their own needs, that stability dies with them. The next generation starts over, often with confusion, pressure, and no map. This is why so many families rise and fall across generations. One generation struggles, the next improves, the next collapses. Not because effort disappeared, but because planning never extended far enough forward. The wealthy do not ask, "How do I live well?" They ask, "How does this decision echo beyond me?" This question changes behavior. It changes how money is saved, how assets are chosen, how education is framed, how responsibility is distributed. It introduces patience. Patience is impossible without long horizons. When you plan only for your own lifetime, urgency dominates decisions. You optimize for comfort, speed, and relief. You consume what could have been preserved. You simplify what should have been systematized. But when you plan across generations, urgency dissolves. You tolerate delay. You invest in durability. You value boring stability over exciting growth. This is why wealth transfer is not about size, it is about structure. A modest asset preserved across decades outperforms large income consumed impulsively. A simple system repeated consistently outlasts heroic effort. Families that break cycles teach this perspective deliberately. They talk about time as something to respect, not outrun. They frame money as a long tool, not a short reward. They emphasize stewardship over enjoyment. This does not mean denying pleasure, it means sequencing it. Short-term thinkers consume first and plan later. Long-term thinkers plan first and consume deliberately. This distinction defines legacy. Children raised with long-time horizons learn patience naturally. They do not expect immediate outcomes. They understand that effort compounds. They accept that stability is built slowly. These children grow into adults who do not sabotage progress for relief. Relief is cheap. Stability is expensive, but it lasts. Thinking beyond one lifetime also changes how mistakes are handled. Short-term systems panic at errors. Long-term systems correct quietly. A mistake does not threaten identity. It is absorbed by the system. This calm response is inherited. The generation that ends poverty does not rush to enjoy the fruits of progress. They protect them. They treat stability as fragile early on, not to restrict life, but to preserve momentum. They understand a hard truth. If you do not plan beyond yourself, your progress becomes an isolated event. Events fade, systems endure. This chapter exists to expand your horizon. You do not need massive wealth to think generationally. You need patience, structure, and the willingness to delay recognition. The question is not whether you can become stable. It is whether your stability will outlive you. That answer depends entirely on how far forward you are willing to think. And thinking far forward is how cycles finally end. Chapter 11. The Bridge Generation. Becoming the one who absorbs the weight so others don't have to. Every generational shift has a cost. Someone has to carry it. This is the truth rarely spoken in families that successfully break cycles, reminding the next generation that stability was not inevitable. It was earned through restraint, patience, and discomfort absorbed by those before them. That generation is called the bridge. The bridge generation lives between chaos and order. They do not fully inherit the stability of the future, and they refuse to fully accept the chaos of the past. They stand in tension, holding both at once. This position is uncomfortable. The bridge generation does not get to enjoy the ease they are building. They often work harder with less visible reward. They sacrifice recognition for continuity. They tolerate being misunderstood by both sides. From behind, they are told they are changing too much. From ahead, no one yet knows what they are building. This loneliness is part of the role. Becoming the bridge generation means choosing discipline without applause. It means building systems that may not fully benefit you, but will deeply benefit those who come after. This is not martyrdom, it is strategy. The wealthy understand that every lasting legacy begins with one generation, willing to delay gratification beyond personal reward. They absorb volatility so others inherit calm. They endure uncertainty so others inherit clarity. They carry restraint so others inherit freedom. This is how cycles end permanently. The bridge generation restructures behavior at the root. They normalize conversations that were once avoided. They replace improvisation with planning. They convert values into routines. They establish rules that survive emotion. They become predictable. Predictability is often criticized as boring, rigid, or uninspired. But in family systems, predictability is safety. Safety allows growth. Children raised on a stable bridge do not need to develop survival instincts. They develop creative ones. They explore instead of react. They plan instead of panic. This is the unseen dividend of generational design. Being the bridge generation often means enduring doubt. Doubt from relatives who question why things are different. Doubt from peers who chase faster gratification. Doubt from yourself when progress feels slow and invisible. But invisibility is not failure. It is incubation. Bridges are not admired while being built. They are trusted once they exist. This is why the bridge generation must anchor identity deeply. They cannot rely on external validation. Their motivation must come from meaning, not reward. Meaning is durable. This generation also learns to absorb discomfort intentionally. They say no more often, they delay more consistently. They protect structure fiercely, not because they enjoy restraint, but because they understand what unrestrained systems produce. They see the patterns clearly because they lived them, and they refuse to pass them forward. This refusal is an act of quiet rebellion, not against people, but against repetition. The bridge generation does not seek perfection. They seek direction. Progress does not need to be fast. It needs to be irreversible. This chapter exists to acknowledge the weight of this role. If you feel tired, conflicted, or lonely in your discipline, you are likely standing in the right place. You are not failing to enjoy life. You are redesigning it, and design always comes before comfort. When the bridge holds, future generations cross effortlessly. They will never know the strain beneath their feet, and that is the point. Chapter 12. What actually gets passed down? Defining real wealth transfer. When people hear the phrase wealth transfer, they imagine money changing hands, accounts, assets, property. But money is the last thing that gets transferred, and often the first thing that disappears. What actually moves from one generation to the next is far more subtle and far more powerful. It is order. Order in how decisions are made, order in how stress is handled, order in how mistakes are corrected, order in how the future is respected. This is the real inheritance. Families that escape generational poverty do not suddenly become wealthy. They become stable. And stability is the rarest asset of all. Stability changes behavior without force. When stability exists, people do not rush. They do not panic. They do not grab what they can while they can. They wait. Waiting reshapes destiny. A person who can wait does not sabotage progress. A family that can wait does not collapse under pressure. A generation that can wait builds quietly and permanently. This is why true wealth transfer begins long before money is passed down. It begins when chaos is replaced with predictability, when emotion is replaced with procedure, when fear is replaced with planning. These shifts are invisible from the outside, but unmistakable on the inside. Children raised in such systems grow up with a fundamentally different relationship to life. They do not feel chased by urgency. They do not equate stress with importance. They do not confuse struggle with virtue. They expect stability. Expectation shapes behavior. A person who expects stability builds systems that maintain it. A person who expects chaos unconsciously recreates it. This expectation is inherited. The bridge generation's greatest contribution is not sacrifice. It is normalization. They normalize calm. They normalize planning. They normalize restraint. What feels disciplined to one generation feels natural to the next. This is how wealth compounds psychologically. True wealth transfer also changes how families experience time. Time stops being something to outrun. It becomes something to steward. Decisions are made with patience. Mistakes are corrected without panic. Growth is measured in decades, not months. This long view protects families from fads, hype, and short-term thinking. It insulates them from cycles of boom and collapse. Insulation is power. When families are insulated, they do not need to chase every opportunity. They can choose deliberately. They can say no without fear. They can prioritize durability over excitement. This calm selectivity is mistaken for conservatism. It is actually confidence. Confidence comes from knowing that systems are working quietly in the background. This chapter exists to reframe the end goal. You are not building wealth so that money can exist. You are building wealth so that panic does not. You are building systems so that decisions do not have to be made in fear. You are building order so that children do not have to grow up improvising stability. Money may or may not last. Markets change. Economies shift. Fortunes rise and fall. But families with order endure. They adapt without collapsing. They adjust without panicking. They correct without shame. This is why generational wealth is not fragile when built correctly. It is not dependent on one person's brilliance. It is not dependent on perfect conditions. It is dependent on design. Design outlives individuals. If you carry one truth forward from this final chapter, let it be this: ending generational poverty is not about escaping the past. It is about refusing to pass it forward. It is about becoming the generation that chooses calm over chaos, structure over struggle, and permanence over appearance. You may never be celebrated for this work. You may never feel finished. You may never see the full impact. But one day, someone in your bloodline will live a life that feels lighter, calmer, and more deliberate, without knowing why. They will assume stability is normal, and that assumption will shape everything they become. That is wealth transfer, not money handed down, but chaos removed. And once chaos is removed, life stops being something to survive. It becomes something to build. Slowly, quietly, forever. Conclusion: the cycle ends here. If you have listened to this audiobook from beginning to end, you are no longer thinking the way you once did. Not because you learned new information, but because you adopted a longer horizon. You no longer see money as something to chase, fix, or fear. You see it as something to design around. You now understand that poverty is not just a lack of income. It is a lack of order that repeats quietly through generations. And you understand that wealth is not excess. It is stability that endures beyond one lifetime. This realization changes how you move through the world. You stop rushing. You stop improvising. You stop mistaking urgency for importance. You begin to build deliberately. This is the moment where cycles actually end. Not when money appears, but when chaos no longer has authority. You may not feel victorious. You may not feel complete. That is normal. This work is not dramatic. It is structural. Structural change rarely feels emotional. It feels quiet, grounded, and steady. That steadiness is the signal. It means you are no longer reacting to the past. You are designing the future. You are now thinking like a steward, not a survivor. Like a builder, not a rescuer. Like a bridge, not a repetition. Whether or not wealth ever carries your name is secondary. What matters is this: the chaos ends with you. The confusion ends with you. The improvisation ends with you. The silence ends with you. What comes after you will feel lighter, not because life is easy, but because structure exists. That is the rarest inheritance of all. This audiobook was written, narrated, and produced by Audiobook Mantra, a channel dedicated to long-form psychological audiobooks on money, identity, discipline, leadership, and self-mastery. These audiobooks are designed to be revisited. Their meaning deepens with time. If this series changed how you think, reflect on it slowly. If it challenged you, return to it later. Transformation does not happen in moments. It happens through repetition. Subscribe to Audiobook Mantra for future long-form audiobooks. And remember, true wealth is not loud, it is stable, it is quiet, it lasts.